ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the show. You're watching your Top Think Tanks review, and I am your host, Bryce Dolan. Now today on the show, we're going to look at 5 of your top 50 United States think tanks, and we'll look at the top stories from each one of their websites. First, we'll start the show with the Brookings Institution, as they call for accountability on Syria's Assad and his backers. Next, the Atlantic Council questions if Russia is misdirecting the world. Then, Human Rights Watch takes a look at the facilitated torture in Turkey since the failed coup attempt earlier this year. Next, the United States Institute of Peace says recapturing Mosul is only the beginning. And then we'll end the show with the Council on Foreign Relations, as the U.S.-Philippine alliance is starting to deteriorate. Now, to begin the show, Brookings Institution calls to account Syria's Assad and his backers. For 5.5 years, the Syrian government has tortured, shot, bombed, and gassed its own people with impunity, with the resulting human cost clear for all to see. Nearly 500,000 dead and 11 million displaced. Since Russia's military intervention began 1 year ago, conditions have worsened, with more than 1 million people living in 40 besieged communities. 37 of those are imposed by pro-government forces. While subjecting his people to unspeakable medieval-style brutality, Syrian President Bashar Assad has sabotaged diplomatic initiatives aimed at bringing a lasting calm to his country. The most recent such diplomatic scheme was trashed not just by Assad, but also Russia, whose aircraft were accused of subjecting a UN-mandated aid convoy to a ferocious 2-hour attack in September. Since then, at least 2,500 people have been killed and wounded in eastern districts of Aleppo, amid horrendous bombardment by Syrian and Russian aircraft, and Russia cynically vetoed a UN resolution that would have prohibited further airstrikes in the city. It is time for the United States to act more assertively on Syria, to further 4 justifiable objectives. First, to end massive civilian killings. Second, to protect what remains of the moderate opposition. Third, to undermine extremist narratives of Western indifference to injustice. And finally, fourth, to force Assad to the negotiating table. The United States should not be in the business of regime change, but the Assad clique and its backers must be brought to account before it's too late. The world will not forgive us for our inaction. The consequences of continued inaction are dreadful. U.S. policy has never sought to decisively influence the tactical situation on the ground. Unrealistic limitations on vetting and a policy that prohibited arming groups to fight the regime left us unable to effectively fight the Islamic State or to move Assad toward a transition. U.S. policy and strategy on Syria had a major disconnect in being focused militarily on a group that was a symptom of the civil war without any means to achieve the stated policy objective, Assad's departure. So the Brookings Institution calls on the U.S. to still take action in Syria and help bring down Assad's regime and his backers, aka Russia. Now, moving on next to the Atlantic Council. The Atlantic Council asked the looming question, is Russia shipping nuclear-capable cruise missiles to the Baltic while saying they're headed for the Mediterranean? While the world has been watching the passage of the Russian Navy's only aircraft carrier, the Admiral Kuznetsov, down the English Channel on the way to Syria, another ship movement has the potential to raise tensions on NATO's eastern flank. This is the apparent Russian deployment of 2 small missile corvettes armed with the Caliber long-range cruise missile to the Baltic. The Caliber can carry either conventional or nuclear warheads, and its maximum range against land targets, according to Russian arms sites, is 2,600 kilometers. Now, the ships in question are the 2 Boyan M-class small missile ships. They are among the Russian Navy's newest vessels. Both entered into service with the Black Sea Fleet at the end of last year and were homeported in Sevastopol. Now, on August 19th, while steaming in the eastern Mediterranean Sea, they fired their main weaponry for the first time in anger, launching 3 cruise missiles at targets in Syria. In addition, the addition of the 2 Boyan M-class missile ships to the Baltic fleet would represent a significant upgrade to Russia's Baltic fleet and a significant new element in an already troubled sea. They are armed with the Caliber missile system, gleefully and tastelessly described by the Sputnik propaganda outlet as Russia's winged incinerator. Now, according to the website of the Black Sea Fleet, each Boyan M-class corvette carries 8 launch units of the 3C-14 Caliber NK missile. Now, if the reporting is accurate and the ships are indeed headed for the Baltic, the addition of Caliber missiles would increase the strike range not just of the Baltic Fleet, but of Russian forces in the Baltic region, 5-fold in fact. Russian officials and news agency statements that the ships are to be based in the Mediterranean would appear at best inaccurate, and at worst, deceptive. The Kuznetsov group is making bigger waves and has the potential to have a greater military impact in the Mediterranean. But the 2 small corvettes with their modern nuclear-capable missiles may have yet an impact out of proportion to their size in the Baltic. So some scary stuff there, as the Russians claimed they were taking their 2 small missile ships to the Mediterranean. In fact, they're going to the Baltic to join up with the rest of the fleet. Now, moving on to Turkey and Human Rights Watch. Turkish police have tortured and otherwise ill-treated individuals in their custody after emergency decrees removed crucial safeguards in the wake of a failed coup attempt in July 2016, Human Rights Watch said. Now, we touched on this before. After the coup attempt in Turkey earlier this year in July, the president of Turkey issued a state of emergency, which essentially gave all direct power to him. Now, the 43-page report from Human Rights Watch titled "A Blank Check: Turkey's Post-Coup Suspension of Safeguards Against Torture" documents how the weakening of safeguards through decrees adopted under the state of emergency has negatively affected police detention conditions and the rights of detainees. It details 13 cases of alleged abuse, including stress positions, sleep deprivation, severe beatings, sexual abuse, and rape threats since the coup attempt. Now, by removing safeguards against torture, the Turkish government effectively wrote a blank check to law enforcement agencies to torture and mistreat detainees as they like, said Hugh Williamson, Europe and Central Asia Director at Human Rights Watch. The cases we have documented seem to indicate that some have done just that. Turkey's government should reinstate these crucial safeguards now. A provision in the emergency decrees absolutes government officials of any responsibility for actions taken in the context of the decrees, and the authorities' decision to postpone a visit to Turkey by the United Nations Special Rapporteur on torture casts serious doubt on the authorities' commitment to prevent torture and ill treatment. At least 241 police officers and citizens died, and up to 2,000 were injured when elements of the military attempted a coup against the elected government on July 15th and 16th. Shortly after the failed coup, the Turkish government declared a state of emergency, a step it is entitled to take in exceptional circumstances. The government also has the right and even the obligation to protect the public, investigate crimes committed during the attempted coup, including murder and bodily harm, and to hold those responsible to account. But unfortunately, that's not what the government's doing. The government keeps extending the state of emergency so they can basically throw this responsibility of taking any responsibility for this ill treatment, for these tortures, and they can keep doing what they wish. Now, we'll keep an eye on Turkey, and hopefully that state of emergency will be lifted very soon. Now, moving on next to the United States Institute of Peace. The United States Institute of Peace says capturing Mosul is only the first step. Iraqi government troops and allied Kurdish forces opened their assault on the city of Mosul, fighting to recapture Iraq's second largest city from guerrillas of the Islamic State. While a military defeat of the extremist group is expected, that will not bring stability or an end to extremist violence in Iraq unless it is followed by a broad reconciliation among deeply divided communal groups. According to Iraq specialists at United States Institute of Peace, so even before the assault began, Iraqi civil society leaders have been preparing an effort to reduce underlying tensions and mediate among Mosul area groups, as they have done in other Iraqi regions. Take a look at their video.
The Islamic State's onslaught over more than 2 years has shredded Iraq's social fabric. potential for a new cycle of violence is frighteningly high in liberated areas, either to exact revenge for atrocities that were committed under ISIS or because of long-standing grievances.
When ISIS took over some areas in Iraq, they played some tribes against the others.
A critical element for rebuilding these communities is reconciliation. To help Iraqis mend shattered ties among and within their communities, tribes, sects, and religions. That will prevent these areas from falling back into violence, and it can establish conditions that would ease the return of more than 3.5 million Iraqis who fled their homes.
Reconciliation is less of an outcome, but more of a process, specifically a process in which drivers of conflict and tension among and between communities are addressed in a way that transforms the relationship in a positive way.
A proven approach for achieving reconciliation involves facilitated dialogue. It's a methodical process of analyzing local conditions, rebuilding mutual understanding, and helping negotiate terms for communities to resolve conflicts without violence.
عملية الحوار اللي تم تبنيها من قبل شبكة الميسرين العراقيين خلقت ثقة بين تلك الأطراف.
For those who have been killed, for those who have been displaced, what does justice look like? There is no universal answer. It really varies what the different communities accept.
Today, the Iraqi government and an international military coalition are preparing for an operation to recapture Mosul, the second largest city in Iraq.
مدة سيطرة داعش عليها صار لها فترة لها تجاوزت السنتين بل قاربت ال3 سنوات تحتاج إلى جهود وإلى خطط فالموصل هي الأخرى الآن الخندق الأخير الذي نتطلع إلى أننا نحقق هزيمة لداعش.
Iraqi non-governmental leaders can do much of this work, but they need support from the international community, funding, political and technical support, and strategic post-conflict stabilization.
The reality is the scope of the problem is well beyond the capacity of one single actor, one single government, or one single community, and it requires collective action.
Iraq's diverse communities can and must learn to live together. Local reconciliation in the most turbulent areas can connect ultimately into a national reconciliation process that will be essential to lasting peace.
We only hope the idea and the need for reconciliation in Iraq spreads quickly. Now, to end the show, the Council on Foreign Relations looks at the possibly deteriorating relationship between the United States and the Philippines. The United States and the Philippines have a long-lasting and complex security relationship based on a defense treaty forged in the early years of the Cold War. Washington and Manila conduct joint exercises and other forms of military training to bolster the preparedness of the armed forces of the Philippines, the AFP, in response to crises and humanitarian disasters. The relationship is also seen as a pillar of the United States' strategic rebalance to Asia. Now, the U.S. military provides vital security to the Philippines at a time of tensions over maritime sovereignty and lingering concern over militant forces in the country. The alliance also grants the United States a foothold to better promote stability and peace in an increasingly volatile region. Now, despite decades of close ties, however, the election of Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte in June 2016 has injected doubt into the resilience of the U.S.-Philippine alliance. The U.S.-Philippines defense agreements were among the United States' first major security treaties in the Asia-Pacific and served as the cornerstone of U.S. policy to maintain regional peace and security after World War II. U.S. bases remained operational until 1992, when negotiations broke down. a rise in anti-U.S. sentiment led the Philippine Senate to narrowly vote down a treaty to renew the lease for U.S. facilities. The deal's rejection marked a symbolic end to what some in the Philippines viewed as the residual legacy of United States colonialism, but did not affect steady cooperation on defense issues. Like many other things, we'll keep our eye on the Philippines and see if anything can change there for the better for the United States and the Philippines. But ladies and gentlemen, that does it for today's show. You're watching your Top Think Tanks review. If you can check out all these articles below in the description, you can find the links directly to the articles and their websites. I encourage you to do so. But thank you for watching, and I was your host, Bryce Dolan.